right. Hello, everyone. Welcome for episode 4 of Conscious Energies podcast. Today's date is 9/16/2019. It's a Monday, a magnificent Monday. Hope all of you are doing well. I had to switch up the music because I kept getting copyright claims, so we'll see if that music's a little better. See how it goes. Thank you everyone for joining me. So today's topic is on polarity. This is I was thinking about this quite a bit. I've been thinking about this quite a bit. It's kind of a deep philosophical chat. I was hoping to get some guests on, but still no go. It's okay. I'll keep trying. I'm not going to give up. I do have a couple of new features set up. I'm going to test them here real quick. But basically, I set up for people viewing live. You can chat and it should show up on the screen. So let's hope that works. Give that a shot. There we go. It looks like it's working. So then if people rewatch it, they can see what people are saying and stuff like that. So anyways, thank you so much for joining me, guys. I appreciate it. Whether you're listening in at another date or joining me in the present moment, I appreciate it. And to get started, let's just talk about polarity in general. When most people think of polarity, right? Most people think of opposites, right? Polar ends, opposites, positive and negative, good and bad, north and south, however you want to look at it. And I think that that's kind of just something that we've established as human beings, right? Is that we have a lot of labels on things, and to help decipher the human language, well, not the human language, but nature itself. We put labels on things in nature to kind of help describe it to one another, kind of like math itself. So mathematically, you could look at polarity as being zeros and ones, very binary. And it seems like it's a pretty conditioned thing to think of. I mean, polarity, like we have the moon and we have the sun, we have day and night. We've kind of already been set up into this whole dichotomy. And to go beyond that is something that's difficult, I think, for people to fathom, and certainly me, it's difficult for me to fathom. But I ask you this, if you were on another planet somewhere, right? And this is completely hypothetical, is completely what if you were on another planet and there was 2 moons, right? And one moon it was so bright, it made like it was almost like a half day. There was this in between. It wasn't day and night. Do you think that would alter the course of what that species, or if you were another species on another planet, or if you just were raised there, would that alter the way that you think about, whether there's just 2 sides to things? I guess kind of what I'm getting into is, there's a lot of people who just believe strictly black and white, who think that if something happens to them in their life, that if it doesn't line up to their expectations and what they want, a lot of times, it's painful and people don't like it. They, say it's bad. This happened to me and it's bad. So rather than seeing what happened and how they can improve on their life, or how what they take away from an instance, a lot of times they just say it's bad, and then they'll relive that day or that moment over and over as if it shapes who they are completely. And it should shape who you are, right? If any mistakes that happen, anything bad that happens, it should, but it shouldn't stop you from continuing forward and doing something new. And how this relates to science in any way is, that's pretty much the premise of science, is you make a crap. When I say science, I mean like engineering and learning and discovering new things, is you make mistakes to learn. Like, the more mistakes you make, the more experiments you carry out, the more you can learn from a situation. So if you look into things like, oh, this is black and white, this is, if this doesn't happen, this means it's true. That is not a good rationale. It's not very good reasoning, because you limit yourself to what could potentially be there in science, and you would not be a very good scientist if you just always had that. Now, if you have a postulate, or you have a hypothesis and you test it and it proves to fail, obviously it means there's other things happening or other ways to go, other ways to test it. But all in all, in general, to look at things in just two-dimensional, good or bad, or this is the way it is, can be kind of a short-sighted, So I think that why that applies to science, it should apply to real life and social dynamics, right? Like, why wouldn't we have, the ability to, why wouldn't we want to create something that can last for a lot longer and isn't limited to just one or two sides? Like, I guess what I mean by that is, so if there's a failure on one end of something, and people automatically assume that the other end is correct, it pigeonholes us. It puts us into a certain situation. I guess the biggest example right now, this is totally, I really wish I had somebody on here, especially somebody from the opposite end. And if you have any comments and you want to say anything in the comments, let me know and we'll talk about it. But as far as politics, and this is like very taboo, and we'll go into religion too a little bit, but this is this is a bad topic to talk about. Politics, you shouldn't talk about politics. But so many people are talking about politics, and the dialogue is always the same. This side versus that side, the bleeding heart liberals versus the neocons or neoconservatives. I mean, there's so many different ideas that people will just peg somebody at, they generalize immediately into a good or bad or blue or red or whatever it may be. And that's really short-sighted. It doesn't really give a clear and concise picture of what people really are, and you know what I mean, like who they are, because people in general have many facets to their life. They believe in many different things, and especially when you're like a keyboard warrior and you're going onto social media platforms and you're like saying, that's just because they're a bleeding heart liberal, or that's because they're gun-toting country boy. You immediately are dehumanizing people, and that's dangerous. That's how wars get started. That's how people continue wars, is through like propaganda and separation and polarization of people, right? So that's the social dynamic. I like to warm it up with the social dynamic first, because really, like, who we are as people really decides kind of where we're going to go in the future, what type of society we want to make, what type of engineering we want to do, what their purposes are. They always come back to who the person creating it is and who we are, each individual. Would be a great example. I guess a good example is like, you look at you look at Henry Ford. Okay, Henry Ford, the type of person he was very hardworking. He got other people to figure things out for him because he was good at organizing things. He had a vision and a dream of something, but didn't necessarily have all the ability to do it by himself, and nobody ever really does. But he created a company and created a very well-known car, the Model T and everything like that, off of a brand new process, a manufacturing line process, right? But his goal was not to, his goal was to bring a car to the average consumer, so people could afford it and be able to drive around without a horse, right? Horseless carriage. And people thought he was insane and thought it'd never happen. And I'm sure he was a little crazy, but at the same time, he had a vision to create, a cheap, affordable car for people. And also, I don't know if his goal and intention was to make a lot of money, but whenever you're solving a problem in a market, you usually end up making a good amount of money, so long as you have your business in check. So he had that vision and that goal to do that. And now if he would have thought, well, if I make this car, knowing now, like what we know, or even knowing at the time, like, it's going to create more deaths, it's going to create more pollution, it's going to be more hazardous, right? He had the insight to like really look way far ahead. Would he still make the car or not? You know what I mean? That's a question. That's a good question to ask, but he didn't polarize himself, right? And I'm sure he had lots of people around him saying he wasn't able to do it. It's like, you can't do that. But nonetheless, he didn't polarize himself. he didn't look at it like, oh, well, this is going to create a lot more deaths, or this is extremely dangerous. He looked at it like, well, in order to get better at something, you have to take a step forward. You know, like a child, when learning to walk, it's dangerous for a kid to learn to walk. They're going to fall, they're going to get hurt. But as they continue to walk and then run, you know, they advance their lives and they continue forward despite what may be, what may seem relatively polarizing. And I guess, you know, it kind of, at the root of it, it really has to do with fear and overcoming fear. Like, because if you look at good and evil, for example, you have good and evil. Good is like something that you would expect or enjoy, right? It's sensations or feelings that make you happy, right? That's good. It's all, you know, people being kind to each other, that's good because it makes people happy. Evil would be, you know, you have an expectation of something to happen and it didn't happen the way that you wanted it. Somebody hurt you, somebody did something to you, right? According to this, the expectation of what should be like happy conditioning of, like, you know, not getting hurt and not getting screwed over by somebody. And this is a very touchy subject. You know, people really want to hold on to those things that happen in their lives that really hurt them. And I understand that, but at the same time, like, those moments that hurt us are what makes us stronger. You know, those moments are what sets us apart from other people and gives us our unique ability to do the things we love or hate. Some people do things they hate all the time, but, you know, whether it's good or bad is kind of relative to the person's perspective, really. I mean, it's relative to an outside observer or somebody who's right there, or yourself even. And that's really the most important thing, is what you think about it. Like, how I feel about the situation. Like, something happened to me that completely fucked my life up, and how I'm moving forward from it. How do I deal with it? You know, that's really you are filled with tons of choices, but that's the choice you make. Well, should I treat this as it was evil and was terrible for me, or should I look at it like, okay, this happened to me, and how do I turn this into a good situation rather than it being evil? You know, how do I shed some light on this, not only learn so I don't make the mistake again, but also, you know, how am I going to move forward? How is this going to make my life stronger and better? So it's something to think about as far as society goes, and educating kids early about this type of stuff, I think, is super important. But not everybody shares this opinion, so it's not like I can just, you know, it's it's not healthy for me to just say that outright, I guess. You know, I like everybody's different and entitled to their own opinions. So that being said, now we'll get into some more scientific stuff, and in particular the idea of positive and negative, right? So north and south polarities on a magnet, positive and negative, you know, the positive and negative of a battery, the something and nothing, so to speak. And how it's kind of perceived, I think, is that, you know, you have a flow of, like, in thermodynamics, which is a great way to look at it, is you have a flow from warmth to cold. Like, you have more capacity for an object to get warm next to an object that's already warm. Like, a system wants to spread. It always wants to become more complex. It doesn't want to just maintain as it is, and can't, because that would violate the universal law of change. I mean, that's the universal constant. Everything is always changing. Everything is always adapting, evolving, creating new things, transitioning into new things. That's the beauty of it, right? And I think in regards to positive and negative of a magnet, like, if you look at it like a magnet, you have programmed the magnet to align in a certain way. You're creating a capacitor, but it's, instead of a dielectric field like in a capacitor, so to speak, it's in a magnetic field. You're making a magnetic capacitor that's actually programmed into the atomic structure, right? And you have this north and south. But in between where the north and south exists, right, that's really where a lot of the magic happens. Like, that's what creates alternating currents. I mean, the flipping of the poles, or the movement of between north and south, that transition, that's where all the magic happens. But yet so many people focus on whether it be north or south. Like, on some devices even people are like, oh, it has to all be pointing north. It depends on where you're at in the earth and all this kind of stuff. But really, I mean, nature has already established these balances of this, what we perceive as a polarity. But it's really all the happenings in between that make things magical, I guess. I mean, you could say magical, but that makes things exciting. It creates experiences. It creates different magnitudes of energy, or the potential for there to be energy to fill a space. So I find it fascinating. That it's so fascinating to me. It's something that I've always kind of wondered why we're so fixated, and the only thing that fixated on the polarity, and the only thing I can think of is is because of our conditioning. We have the sun and the moon, a male and a female, masculine and feminine figures, and these conditionings that have happened being human beings. That's the only really kind of the root cause I can really come up with it, because I don't think nature really cares, the polarities of things. It's just always trying to find a balance and always moving. It's trying to do its thing. And then back to the magnet part, our opposites attract in magnetism, and there's no way around it. Like there's still the balance there, right? The opposites attract to create a balance, to establish a balance, and you've programmed this ferritic material to want to align, but it's locked in the Coulomb barriers of the atoms. I believe that this is a decent way to describe it. I could be completely wrong, and magnets themselves still have a lot of mystery around them. But essentially, you're making make polarized atomic structure. You've set them in place, and then the crystalline lattices, or the Coulomb barriers between the atoms, are kind of holding it in place, because that force is stronger than the actual magnetic force. That's kind of what a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but that's kind of the general idea, I believe, of a magnet itself. And then in electrical, what's funny is in electrical systems, now we're told that the flow of current moves from negative to positive, which is kind of opposite of what used to be thought, I guess, to some degree. But if you really look at it, like you really look at electrical systems, it's moving both ways. Like it's connecting to wherever the connection point is. That's what you get, a spark when you close a circuit at that spot, because you've just made the connection between the north and south, right? You have the unbalance that's been established, and you are, by making that connection, then your nature is doing its thing to try to balance the system out through electrical dynamic principles, and through thermodynamic principles too. If you have a system that's not electrical in nature, but is like just some type of heat, like your cup or your boiling pot of water, same principle, and it's that balance. So I guess what I'm getting is, like, to harmonize or to balance is what nature is constantly telling us. And yet so often in a lot of our social systems, we focus on positive or negative, or this is right, this is wrong, and I think that's very detrimental to us moving forward as a species. Like what's going to happen as we become more and more polarized, as we start pointing our fingers more and more at other people, like their way is wrong and our way is right. Like we're missing all these other little pieces that are there that we don't even consider, and that could potentially be the fix to a problem, right? Rather than a band-aid, it's like a bigger picture. You see a large-scale fix to the problem. And then another thing that I noticed too, as far as the very concept of, and I will say this, especially when you look at like masculine and feminine figures, there are traits, there are things that are just facts as far as nature goes, right? I mean, north and south. This is a good example. This way I say a little bit PC. I won't use the male and female version, but north and south, right? When you're in the northern hemisphere, things are going to be different than when you're in the southern hemisphere. Water spins differently. and because of magnetism is I believe this still the standard idea, although that's another kind of mysterious thing. But I believe it's because of magnetism, so water's spinning in a different direction. And so those types of sure, like for sure things are there. Nature explains it to us. Nature tells us that stuff. But then how we take it, I mean, like now, okay, look at it this way. So because your water spins, clockwise and mine spins counterclockwise, mine's better. My water's better than yours, right? That's just an example. It's just silliness, but yet we do this on a daily basis, and in all kinds of ways. And to go into religion, and this is also a very touchy subject. And I'm saying religion, not spiritualism, because I believe that there's many religious people who are very spiritual and they understand what what Christ talked about, or what the Torah talks about, whatever religion you want to take it. But that it was about understanding and tolerance and taking stories of the past that people had and putting them into a book form that really it's like a moral guideline. It became a moral guideline for us. And but then there's also a lot of people in religious sects and different religious beliefs that honestly think that people are demons, and they don't take even 2 seconds to put themselves in that person's position, or just to think, well, maybe what's happened to this person in their lifetime, what has this person gone through. And it's really unfortunate because, again, I was saying, it pigeonholes, it makes generalizations immediately, and it's comfortable. It's super comfortable for us to be, oh yeah, that person's an asshole because they did this to me, and look, they do it to other people. They're just an asshole, and they're not a good person. Simple as that. But then if you were to, and that's comfortable. That's it makes you feel good. Okay, and then this is built into our DNA practically from way back. Then you avoid that person, right? It's just like when back in the plains, you're on the savannah and you see lion tracks. It's gonna immediately you're gonna be triggered to be a little bit fearful and be like, okay, well, I'm seeing these lion tracks. How fresh are they? And well, how close is this lion? And you start to become aware of it and know which way not to go and to avoid it. And that's really healthy and really important for our minds and our ego. That's what our ego is, right? To protect our bodies, to protect ourselves in some way, to protect our bodies and our minds, and to stay alive. But there's a certain point where we trick ourselves, we'll fool ourselves. At least I do. I do all the time. Maybe you guys are better than me, and I hope you're better than me. But many times, it's another example is 2 nights ago, 3 nights ago, something like that. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I had to go pee. I was very tired, and it's very dark. And I'm walking through the hallway, feeling around, hoping I don't step on any kids' toys laying around or whatever. You know how it goes if you have kids and or pets, furry babies. But I'm walking in the dark, stumbling in the dark, and headed to the bathroom, right? And I looked into my front room, and I see this figure. And it, for that moment, that split 2 seconds, 1 or 2 seconds, I was just like, who is that? And I got puffy, my chest puffed up, and I was ready to go. I was ready to throw down, right? And then I stopped and reflected for a second. I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. That shadowy figure isn't moving, and I'm pretty sure there's a coat rack there. So, of course, I walk over to the light slowly and turn on the light, and sure enough, it's like a coat rack, and it looks like somebody in the darkness. But you turn the light on, you shed light on it, and you realize there's a coat rack, even though that coat rack's been there for ages. When you're walking in the dark and you're not, you're just doing your thing, your mind immediately triggers. It wants to protect itself, right? And it's a healthy thing. But notice that I went and turned on the light. I shed light on the situation. I investigated. I learned more. And instead of just running away, and freaking out, I went and investigated further. I went deeper. I think that's kind of the point, of getting over polarizing thoughts, is to actually immerse yourself on both sides, to really look into something deeply and find it out holistically, like its entirety. Because if you just jump to conclusions of things that you've been told in the past, nothing new will develop. And that's like nature is encouraging that in those moments of polarity, like, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at, is in those moments of polarity is when nature's encouraging you to take another step forward, to create something new, to make something that's never been made before, or see something that you've at least never experienced before. So polarizing thoughts, it's very, 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 very unfortunate and fortunate at the same time. I guess I shouldn't say it's unfortunate, but yeah, now I'm just rambling. But that's the way it goes when you're all alone on a stream, right? So I'll say another really interesting bit of the good and bad paradox, right? The polarity of that is, we've been told certain things, like certain ideas, like money is bad or making mistakes is bad. This is a big one, is making mistakes is bad. Like, you don't want to make any mistakes. Like in school, we're constantly being bombarded. Like, you go to school and, making a mistake is bad. Making a mistake will, cause you to fail. That is, like, I think one of the worst pieces of advice for an educational system ever, because if you don't fail at something, then how are you ever going to know how to do it right? I mean, you could be told outright, but sometimes what you've been told is the correct way to do something is absolutely not. Like, that's just the way it's been done for so long, but there could be better ways to do something. And if you never explore and test things out, you'll never know. It's like right now we use petroleum products to drive cars, and there's been better ways to do it, right? But because we have an established system and a certain manufacturing process and all this type of stuff, and we've been told that there's no better way to do it, nobody explores there. Very few do, and when they do, they're met with a lot of resistance. And a lot of times, I think that resistance is the better way to go. And it seems counterintuitive, but it's almost like gyroscopic movement, if you look at it this way. Like, something spun up, a certain amount of mass is spun up, right? And the only way it ever changes its spin, right, is when it's tilted on an angle. When something changes in it, the inertial precession goes 90 degrees towards where it's turned. Like, it's trying to find a new pathway, and so it's trying to meet that resistance with something new. So, like, to know that there's something there that is resistive, sometimes to use that to go around it is important. Like, it will sink your clock into something new, or your timing is changed into something new that nobody else has seen before, nobody has ever considered, or nobody's ever tried it before, and it makes new possibilities come to light. But those are things that you can talk till your face is blue, but until you actually act on something, that's the most important thing for us all to do, is to actually put something into action. Take our purpose or our passions and put them into something. It's kind of what this podcast is about. Trying to get more dialogue and more conversation about things that we can do, just talking about them first, and then bringing them into reality. There's lots of things that I'm working on, but I want to hear from you guys. Like, that's what's really important. Like, I want to know what type of things drive you guys and what you're passionate about, because that's really what it comes down to, is connecting with each other, knowing what we're all passionate about, finding our common ground and what we want to achieve as a community of people, and then like bringing what we have to the table, being able to help each other out in that sense, whether it be through building something that has to do with experimental stuff. That's cool. I got my own kind of things I'm doing, but I have some really good ideas that I know I wouldn't be able to accomplish by myself. So whether it's like that, or if it's like you guys have some type of theory or something you want to get off your chest, or even if like people are just having problems with something, like I'm always here to help out wherever I can. People say that I always have a positive spin on things. I don't know if that pisses people off or actually helps to make people happy, but you can always ask me, reach out to me and let me know, and I'm here to even just listen. You know, sometimes some people just want someone to listen to, and I'm here to just listen as well. So yeah, that's what the stream's about. That's what Conscious Energies podcast is really about, is building a community of people and opening up dialogue and having conversations that normally are limited, that a lot of people don't want to have. Conversations about philosophy and religion, politics, free energy. That's a big naughty word in the scientific community. Perpetual motion, those ideas, and being able to just have a voice. I really want to help people have more of a voice, because I think a lot of people are scared to put themselves out there, and there's no reason to be scared. I mean, that fear, you can look at it this way, like fear can either be something that stops you from something because you know that something might go wrong, or it can be something that excites you because you know something can go wrong, right? I mean, if you have fear of something, it's there because you have some type of limiting belief, or you have a belief. It doesn't, not necessarily limiting, it's just you have a belief there that may be programmed as far back as, your childhood or further, of like, well, if I get in front of everybody, I might make myself look like a fool. But the thing is it's kind of like when you went to middle school or high school, you had a zit on your face, and you're so worried about the zit. Not everybody, but some people are so worried about the zit. Everybody's going to see the zit. It's going to be nasty. People may see it, but that's just surface. Most people don't care. And if they do care, they're not the type of people you want to align yourself with anyways. They're shallow, and they only look at the surface stuff. The people that I like to communicate with and align with are people who are respectful to the opinion and the perspective of other people who want to do something that they're passionate about and share it with the world. Those are the type of people we need more. The people who aren't scared to put themselves out there and be a little bit, I wouldn't say insecure, but vulnerable. People who aren't afraid to be vulnerable. Because when you come out and you say exactly who you are and you speak your heart, and when somebody comes and says you're wrong, or somebody comes and just trolls you hard, like you have every right to just be like, well, that's their opinion, and let it go, because it's from your heart. It's what you believe in. And so long as, if it's a polarizing opinion, like I was talking about, then it's unfortunate, right? Because how far is it going to go? You're usually, if it is a polarizing opinion, you're going to battle with the person that just trolled you, right? So, you'll be exposed. But if it's authentic and you don't know for 100% sure, but that's where your heart is, you're passionate about a certain thing, a certain avenue, or a certain artistry, a certain thing that you like to do with your life, there isn't anybody in the world who tell you that you're too good or too bad for it. You're just doing it because you enjoy the process. You enjoy what it does, how it makes you feel, and hopefully what it does for the future of you, of your future self in the present moment. So that's really why I started doing this. I hope that I get more people involved and get more people into this type of stuff. And so speaking about that, since I'm kind of running out, talking to myself can be a little bit rough sometimes. I can't crack jokes to myself. I guess I could, but it wouldn't be as funny. It wouldn't be the same, guys. It just would not be the same. So instead, on the live stream, I'm going to go into monopole. Let's look at monopole, because this would be the opposite of like a polarity, right? And we'll look at, we're on YouTube, but we'll look up monopole and see. Supposedly, if you don't know what a monopole is, so a monopole is when magnetism only goes in one direction. There is no north or south. It's just all north or all south type of deal, or all negative, all positive. So you have atomic alignment that aligns where all of the polarity would be centralized, or all of the one polarity would be completely centralized and like nullified, and all the other polarity would be outward facing, I guess, is kind of a weird thing to think about. But monopole magnet. We'll see, because last I heard, monopoles, monopolarity, they've discovered it, like that it could exist on the quantum level, but I don't know. So in particle physics, a magnetic monopole is a hypothetical elementary particle that is an isolated magnet with only one magnetic pole. So that's pretty much what I said, right? A magnetic monopole, and I should have specified that it is quantum, because electrons are subatomic, right? But anyways, I digress. A magnetic monopole would have a net magnetic charge. Modern interest in the concept stems from particle theories, notably the grand unified and superstring theories, which predict their existence. So like I said, it's been hypothesized. Magnetism in bar magnets and electromagnets is not caused by magnetic monopoles. And indeed, there is no known experimental or observational. Okay, so they're saying there's no known monopole to exist or experiment, but I'm pretty sure, unless it was debunked, there was one recently that came about in quantum mechanics, quantum engineering. But let's take a look here real quick. Monopole proof. We'll look into monopole proof. Overwhelming evidence for monopoles. So this is Nature News. So one of those facts of life that physicists live with is that everything magnetic has either north or south poles. When researchers try to split the two, they simply get another magnet with poles of its own. There's no reason that should be the case, and for decades they've been on the hunt for a single pole or a monopole. They want to know if I want cookies. I'm gonna just let it be there. So people have been looking for monopoles in cosmic rays and particle accelerators, even moon rocks, says Jonathan Morris, a researcher at the Helmholtz Center for Materials and Energy in Berlin. If you don't know who Helmholtz is, that's a pretty interesting dude as far as resonance, and very, very interesting scientist. So now Morris and others have found the strongest evidence yet for magnetic monopoles in small crystals about the size of an earplug. When the crystals are chilled to near absolute zero, so yeah, quantum physics, they seem to fill with tiny single point of north and south. The points are less than a nanometer apart and cannot be measured directly. Nevertheless, so they can't be measured, which keeps it in the hypothetical. They make their case in two papers published today in the Journal of Science and other work published in the preprint server arxiv.org. Okay, let's just skip to some of this stuff. So the unquestionable evidence, theoretical work had shown that monopoles probably exist, and they have been measured indirectly. But the science papers are the first direct experiments to record the monopole's effects, spin on the spin ice material. I guess that's what they're calling it, spin ice. The papers use neutrons to detect atoms in the crystal aligned into long daisy chains. These daisy chains tie each other north and south monopoles together, known as Dirac strings. Dirac, another very kick-ass scientist. The chains, as well as the existence of monopoles, were predicted in the 1930s by the British theoretical physicist Paul Dirac. So heat measurements in one paper also support the monopole argument. So they're checking heat signatures, it looks like, but known as the Dirac strings. This is interesting though, because they said that they're chained up, which I think it's a little bit interesting, because if they're chained up north-south, that wouldn't make them monopoles. Let's see if I just read this wrong. So these daisy chains tie each other north and south monopole together. Okay, so yeah, okay, that's still makes it sound like we can't go small enough to even see if they're bipoled. So the two is yet unpublished papers. Evidence. The first provides additional observations, and the second uses a new technique to determine the magnetic charge of monopole to be 4.6 times 10 to the negative 13th joules per Tesla meter. Together, the evidence for magnetic monopoles is now overwhelming, says Steve Bramwell, a materials science at University College of London. and author on one of the science papers said, let's see, this sort of measurement makes monopoles more substantial, at least in my mind, at least in his mind. Our researchers at Pennsylvania State Park, whether the monopoles will be seen directly in another question. Like any charged particle, opposites attract, and the north and south poles typically cluster together less than a nanometer from each other. That makes them extremely hard to detect individually, but, Schiffer says, I'm very hesitant to say that anything is impossible. That's good. It's a good scientific approach to things, but not being able to see the size of the actual atomic structure and then calling it a monopole is interesting. Kind of, yeah, I always think it's funny. It's kind of like saying absolute zero. It's never absolute. There's always energy flooding in. There's always other things we aren't quite aware of as far as But I guess the principle behind the monopole is that if they exist, if we can really work on creating the monopole, or being able to master the monopole, we'd be able to create abundant, energy with the perpetual motion stuff, I guess, is some people's idea of the monopole, whether it be perpetual motion or just extended energy. Because anytime you put, just to put it simply, the universe is always changing. That's a universal constant. So nothing lasts forever. Nothing would be, forever, except for maybe the universe itself. I don't know. But yeah, very, very interesting. The mysterious missing magnetic monopole. So I got two of you guys on here. If you guys want me to go over anything, please feel free to speak up. Just put that in the messages there. It pops up on the screen now, which is nice. So, the quantization of quasi-particles is MIT magnetic monopoles. We'll take a look at this. So this is a very technical paper. Magnetic monopoles are proposed particles that carry magnetic charge. Their existence can be motivated by... See, it's really interesting because, pretty much every particle carries a magnetic charge except for neutrons, right? That's at least what I've been told. They all carry magnetic, some type of magnetic charge, a positive or a negative. So it's really interesting that Maxwell's, their existence can be motivated by two observations: that Maxwell's equations would be made more symmetric, and that the existence of even one magnetic monopole would require electric charge to be quantized. We will present three derivations of quantization condition upon magnetic charge. One built using the Aronov-Bohm effect, one using gauge invariance, and one using Landau levels. I probably slaughtered that name. I'm not sure what scientist that is. Landau. So magnetic monopole quasi-particles in certain materials known as spin ices. Okay, so here's another version or another paper they're calling it spin ices, as well as magnetic monopole detection experiments will be discussed qualitatively. So the spin ices are like the crystals that they put in close to absolute zero. It's interesting. So magnetic monopoles are proposed as yet unobserved particle. A magnetic monopole is an isolated magnetic charge, so it's basically just repeating the same stuff. And then it goes into a lot of equations that very much resemble Maxwell's equations. They are Maxwell's equations for symmetry. And some quadratic expressions. Yeah, quadratic equations. If you've ever, there's some calculus. If you ever play with that, man, ugh, talk about a brain herder. Maxwell's equations are just, they're painful for my mind. Somebody's honking. So why doesn't our universe have magnetic monopoles? Here's a Forbes article. We'll take a look at this. Why doesn't our universe have magnetic monopoles? Okay, so there's going to be an ad popping up. Good gravy. Symmetry and asymmetry. See, that's another awesome thing to talk about as far as polarity, and whether, believing in polarity or non-polarity. A good way to look at it is, symmetry and asymmetry, opposites, right? When you talk about fundamental forces in the universe, there are only 4 different types: the gravitational force, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. What causes these forces to exist? In each case, there's an underlying fundamental property of matter that enables interactions to occur, a type of charge. For gravity, it's mass. For electromagnetism, it's electric charges. For the strong nuclear force, it's color charges. And for the weak nuclear force, it's weak hypercharge. But it didn't have to be that way. There could have been not only electric charges at play in electromagnetism, but magnetic ones as well. For some reason, though, our universe doesn't seem to have any, even though physics could completely allow it. Our universe is not symmetric. So they're talking about asymmetry. In gravitation, the force that any mass exerts on another is equal and opposite to the force exerted by the second mass on the first. For electric charges, the same thing is true, although there's an extra caveat. The electric force can either be positive or negative depending on the signs of the charges. In addition, electricity is closely related to another force, magnetism. Just like electricity has positive and negative charges, or like repels like and opposite attract, magnetism has north and south poles, where like repels like and opposites attract. But it appears that magnetism is fundamentally different from electricity in a particular and obvious way. So what is this particular and obvious way, you might say? Well, in electricity, you can have many charges configured together, or you can have a positive and negative charge in isolation, like an electron. But in magnetism, you can have many poles configured together, but you can't have an isolated north pole or south pole without the other. So they're saying in electricity configured, but you cannot have a positive or negative charge in isolation. Or you can have a positive or negative charge in isolation, like an electron. They're saying you can have that, but in order for it to be noticeable and apply force on anything, you'll have to combine the opposite charges. I mean, you have to have motion. You have to have motion in the ocean to rock your boat, right? So, but in magnetism, they're saying poles configured together, but you can't have an isolated north pole or south pole. I mean, I think that's kind of a matter of perception. Like, it depends on what you're looking at. Because I know that you can make heavy shielding on a north pole of a magnet, right? And basically absorb most of the north pole's side. You're not making a monopole, because it's still there, it still exists. It's just in the actual, it's flowing, the magnetic alignment's flowing through the ferrous material that you're attaching it to. But nonetheless, you've isolated one side of it to a degree, and that's basically what you're doing in the electrical. I mean, you're isolating one part of it into some type of matter. Like the electron is always negative, so that's what they say. That's why electricity flows from the negative side. But to say that it's isolated differently, I don't know how that's entirely correct. Like, it always exists. The positive always exists there. So, but anyways, I guess it's better to look at it symmetry and asymmetry rather than positive and negative, because it would be like a line would be it being isolated is a line, and then it being usable, or it being it becomes a loop. Then it's actually doing work on something, or it's creating something, whether it be heat, light, motion, kinetic energy. The same goes with a magnet. Like, if it's just sitting there, it's not doing anything necessarily. So I don't know. Anyways, in physics, when we have two opposite charges or poles connected together, we call it a dipole. But when we have one by itself, we call it a monopole. So gravitational force, compared to the electrostatic force, is the epitome, basically, of symmetry and asymmetry. the electrostatic force being symmetrical, the gravitational force being asymmetrical, and force being gravity, mass, the mass of one object and the mass of the other over the radius squared. Whereas, if you look at it though, the equation between, it's funny that they bring this up because this is really important in gravity, is the equations are exactly the same. The only thing that we've done for gravity is we've decided to attach it to time in order to fill the gap there. Space and time are connected together, so it creates a well in space that is a force applied on space according to the mass of an object and according to the time it takes for a light to travel. And with the electrostatic force, there is none of that. There is a constant, the Coulomb's law, which has a constant built in, that's based upon C, I believe it's the same principles based upon light. Oh, actually, no, there is no. It's not even in the equation. I don't believe. That's something I'll have to look up afterwards. But I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, Coulomb's law is closer to basically just the charge potential between two electrical bodies. The electric charge density of a material, which could be looked at just like mass and gravity. It's almost like the same. They're really the same equation, but then they're viewed differently because one's asymmetrical and one's symmetrical. One just affects the body of mass of one object, and they both really do the same thing. So it's really hard to say that. The only thing is, like, there's no inverse for gravity is why they say that. But then I would beg to differ. Like, if those two bodies come together, there's certainly going to be an inverse. There's certainly going to be some type of kinetic response between the two bodies. So I don't know. It's just interesting to think about. But gravitational monopoles are easy. It's just a mass, right? But electric monopoles are easy too. Any fundamental particle with a charge, like an electron or a quark, will do. But magnetic monopoles, as far as we can tell, they don't exist. So this goes into some deep electrical theory too, in that you have the actual, what's happening with magnetism is the actual loop. You've actually closed the loop. So it's you're expressing the electrical charges into some type of force, into some type of response, like the inverse, right? So when you have a connection in a loop, you have a magnetic field present, and you also have in the actual atomic structures, in the actual atoms that the electrons are moving through, right? And you also have responses that are like heat, sound. You've closed the loop and you're creating something. So it's kind of like, this is going to be so deep and philosophical. Hopefully this won't, what if it turns you off, then whatever, it was meant to be. But it's kind of like a mother and a father coming together, right, and having a baby. They've closed the loop and made something new. They've come together as one entity to close the loop and make something new. That's just a philosophical kind of like deep approach to it, but it's the same principles apply. That's how magnetic fields are created. That's how any energy is created, is when you have symmetry and asymmetry, or not symmetry and asymmetry, but when you have opposites come together, and in their motion of coming together, they usually create something. So, and that's what they're going over down below here too. If you have a moving electric charge, also known as electric current, it creates a magnetic field perpendicular to the charge movement. If you have a straight wire with electric current flowing through it, it produces a magnetic field in a circuit around the wire. So, and then this is another very important part. It creates a singular polarity though. Like if it's a DC current, right? If it's a direct current and it's just moving from one way to the other, there's no AC, it creates a polarity. So you could consider it to be a monopole in a way, but it's really not. If you measure either side of a coil, right, you would get an obvious north and south side of the coil. But nonetheless, you close that circuit, and then what happens? You build up a response of heat or light and things like that, you don't have a moving magnetic field. You just have a single magnetic field that can like make things attract to it and stick to it, right? But won't change. I just had almost like an epiphany too. So think about it. If we're talking about symmetry and asymmetry in the electric theory or in electrical engineering, you look at it like this. The DC would be the bipole, right? Or the dipole, di, whatever, same Latin root. But if you have, and that would be your symmetry, right? If you have AC, that technically wouldn't that be a monopole? Because neither of the poles are locked in. I mean, if you got it at a high enough frequency, would it turn into a DC where it would have one side, or would it, or would it be like a monopole? You know what I mean? Like, it's a really interesting thought experiment to do. But thinking about it, like, if you have AC current and you look at it just in symmetry and asymmetry rather than it being positive or negative, then some new opportunities I think can present themselves as far as a greater understanding of atomic structures organizing themselves. That's really what a magnet is. Is particles that organize themselves into a certain framework that attracts other ferritic material, other objects that have a affinity to have magnetism, have their particles aligned. So as it turns out, this goes both ways. Like I said, the laws of physics tend to be symmetric. This means that if I have a loop or coil of wire and I change the magnetic field inside of it, it will create an electric current in the loop, causing electric charges to move. Yeah, this is all pretty basic Faraday stuff. Yep, this is the principle of electromagnetic induction discovered by Michael Faraday more than 150 years ago. So you can have electric charges, electric currents, and electric fields, but there are no magnetic charges or magnetic currents, only magnetic fields. So, and this brings me into another thing. I don't know if anybody's ever done this experiment, but if you take the PMH, the permanent magnet holder, if you take a current and run it through a coil on like a U-bolt and attach a flat piece to the side of the U-bolt, it creates a magnetic loop and will create magnetic charge in that U-bolt until you pull it off, and it stores the energy there. So it's almost like in the symmetrical behavior of nature is that if you put in electric, and this is something that's been talked about constantly. They're probably going to go into it down here too. I'm seeing E and B fields, but if you put an electrostatic force into something or electricity, 90 degrees out of phase of the way you put it in there, the left-hand rule, you're going to have a magnetic field, and then you put the magnetic field into an object, and you're creating what would be considered bipole, like a bipole. But if it's in this closed loop, right, and the circuit's closed, right, and it has that symmetry, like would it still be considered a bipole, or would it be a monopole? You know what I mean? Like because you have this, and I'm not talking about electrical loop, because an electrical loop, like I just said, you have 90 degrees angled 90 degrees out of phase, you're going to have a magnetic field. So obviously it would not. The top of the loop would be positive, the bottom would be negative type of thing, or north, south, however you want to look at it. But if you instead have the other way around, right, and the magnetic flux or the magnetic current is running through that loop, would that be considered a monopole? So it's another thing to think about. So yeah, again, there's no magnetic charges. So in other words, there's a fundamental asymmetry between the electric and magnetic properties of the universe. So that's basically what I was just talking about, right? It's why Maxwell's equations for E and B fields look so different from one another. So differential form, go for Gauss's law, go over Maxwell's law. I can't really talk about, delta times B equals 0 over over a podcast. But if you guys haven't researched this stuff, it's pretty interesting stuff. The reason these equations look so different is because electric charges, the P and the Q, and the current, the J and the I, the joules and I is just a classic for current, or let's see, exist, but their magnetic counterparts do not. If you take them away, the electric charges and currents, they would be symmetric, up to a factor of some fundamental constant relating to them. But what if magnetic charges and currents did exist? Physicists have wondered about this for more than a century, and assuming that they did, we could just write down what Maxwell equations would look like if there were such a thing as magnetic monopoles. Here's what it would look like. So then it shows the difference. It goes into like Lorentz force, Ampere's law, Faraday's law, Gauss's law, all that kind of stuff. But again, except for some fundamental constants, the equations now look very symmetric. We'd be able to make magnetic charges move simply by changing electric fields. We'd be able to create magnetic currents and induce electric fields simply by doing so. Dirac played around with them in the 1930s, but it was generally recognized that they ought to leave some signature behind if they exist. None of this was taken seriously, however, because physics is at its core an experimental science. Without any evidence of magnetic monopoles, it's pretty hard to justify them. But that began to change in the 1970s. People were experimenting with grand unified theories, or the ideas that there might be more symmetry to nature that we presently see. The symmetries might be badly broken today, leading to our universe that has 4 separate fundamental forces, but perhaps were all unified at some high energy into a unique force. A consequence that all of these theories have is the existence of new high energy particles, and in many incarnations, magnetic monopoles. So here's an example of a magnetic monopole. Basically, like I said, it's just everything's going outward. It's like I was kind of explaining, is that it's all north pointing outwards, and all south would be pointing inwards. So it'd be only relative to, like, what you look at it at face. Like, your it's almost like light, really, if you think about it. Light's almost the exact same way. Light could be considered a monopole in a way. We have no weight to it. It's only done via electron. It's like it is a radiating particle, supposedly, but we have yet to really measure the weight of a photon, although they say they have. It's kind of hard to say. But you only look at it from one perspective, and it's almost like light in a sense. Would be a good example, because I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, or please leave it in the comments or message me. You can message me on Instagram, message me on Facebook, whatever means of messagery you would like. But it'd be something interesting to talk about. So, why light? Because light has no real, light doesn't have a charge per se. You can't. Supposedly, you can, according to what some people do, you can make light interact with magnetic fields. However, all the things that I've seen when people are doing that, they actually have some form of other particle that's refracting the light, and they're actually manipulating that particle to make it look like light's bending. But that's just refraction, refractory indexes, and reflection, and all these other principles involved. So I'm not 100% sold on that idea that light can be bent by magnetic fields. And from all the other stuff I've looked into, I haven't seen any cases where that's entirely true. It just depends on the medium it's moving through. Then light can be affected by magnetic fields. It's really interesting. So that's what I'm kind of saying. Maybe it's a monopole. It has to be affected by other external mediums like space and stuff like that. Just going off on a tangent here a little bit, but magnetic monopoles have always been an enticing possibility for physicists, but these new theories renewed interest. So in the 1970s, there were searches going on for them, and the most famous one was led by a physicist named Blas Cabrera. I think I'm saying that right. He took a long wire and made 8 loops of it, designed to measure magnetic flux through it. If a monopole passed through it, he would get a signal of exactly 8 magnetons. Magnetons? Okay, I don't know what that's referring to. I don't know that unit of measurement. So I lost my spot. But if if a standard dipole magnet passed through it, he'd get a signal of +8 followed immediately by one of -8, so he could tell these apart. So he built this device and waited. The device wasn't perfect, and occasionally one of the loops would send a signal. But on even rarer occasions, 2 loops would send a signal at once. But you'd need 8, and exactly 8, if it would to be a magnetic monopole. The apparatus never detected 3 or more. This experiment ran for some months with no success, and was eventually relegated to being checked up on only a few times a day. In February of 1982, he didn't come in on Valentine's Day. When he came back to the office on the 15th, he surprisingly found that the computer and the device had recorded exactly 8 magnetons on February 14th, 1982. Valentine's Day. So, can't see the pictures on podcast, but yeah, he just measures a happening of flux. Magneton is a unit of measurement for flux. I actually want to look it up now. I'm going to look it up real quick. Okay, so a magneton is a Pokemon that... Oh, never mind. Mag... Okay, I even spell that right? See, M-A-G... Magnetic... I want to hatch this out. Magnetic monopole. Where did that go? It was right here. Magnetic dipole. I just want to know... Yeah. I didn't know. Magneton. Magneton's weakness. It's all. It's all Pokemon. Magneton. SI unit. SI unit. Oops, I spelled unit wrong. Bohr magneton. Okay, so there we go. Bohr. It's an atomic scale. Gaussian CGS unit. This is constant. So a natural unit for expressing a magnetic moment of an electron caused by either orbital or spin angular momentum. So the Bohr magneton is defined as SI units. Okay. I recognize the unit there. B field. I just always thought it was a magnetic field, but now I know. And now you guys know too, hopefully. Okay, so let's finish this up here. The discovery roared through the community, generating a huge amount of interest. Huge devices with large surface areas and more loops were built. But despite extensive searching, another monopole was never seen. So it could have been some type of error in the machine. So Steven Weinberg even wrote Blas Cabrera a poem on February 14th, 1983. I was only 1 year old that day. Roses are red, violets are blue. It's time for the monopole number 2. Wait, but if there's 2 of them, don't they become a bipole? A dipole? Terrible magnet joke. But monopole number 2 never came. Was it just an ultra-rare glitch that Cabreja's experiment experienced? Was it the one and only magnetic monopole in our section of the universe that just happened to pass through his detector? Find out next time on the exciting episode of Conscious Energies podcast. I just thought that was a good opportunity to put that there. As we've never detected another, it's impossible to know. But science needs to be reproducible to be accepted. And this experiment simply wasn't able to be replicated. That's a huge problem for many scientific experiments to this day, is reproducibility and being able to make it replicatable. What? Ice Cube? Sorry. Today experiments still look for them, but these limits are insanely low. So now they're just going into probably the temperature ranges that they're checking, maybe. High energy neutrino astrophysics. That is okay. As beautiful as it would be, and as much as we might expect it, nature just isn't symmetric, not at all levels, and that's no one's fault. It's just the way our universe happens to be. Better to accept it as it actually is, no matter how aesthetically pleasing it would be, where it different, than to let the predispositions guide us astray. So, is this written by Ethan Siegel? Yeah, Ethan Siegel has a lot of content. He writes a lot of stuff. Very, very interesting. I think he's written some stuff on LENR too, but he is a PhD in astrophysics, which completely explains why. It's funny. I'm gonna push a little bit here. I think it's funny that he says in here, that the universe, almost as a matter of fact, the universe is not symmetrical, right? It's asymmetrical, and then brings up, let our predispositions guide us astray. Yet, just by him having that statement that it's not symmetrical, and yet we don't know the full amount of the universe and how it operates, is kind of, once again, it's like full circle. It's a little short-sighted. It makes me sad, you don't leave, if you fill up your cup, you don't leave any room for anything else to be put in it, right? So to have that predisposition, this is a matter of fact, it is asymmetrical, and there's no, as we know it today, we look at it, it seems asymmetrical according to gravity and how gravity operates. However, if something came to light that would show the other side of gravity, the other side of interaction between things, then it would become, a different question. It could become far more symmetrical. We just don't look at it that way. So, really interesting to get into people's minds and think about those things is something that I find fascinating. It's like psychology in a way, but to catch myself is, I think, far more. And I highly recommend you guys do this too. Is whenever you can, unlearn something, and then just try to relearn it and make sure you have all the facts correct. And when somebody tells you you're wrong, instead of arguing with them, take their perspective and point of view in full detail and really look into it and decide from the facts presented, rather than just off of opinion or just off of your gut feeling and your intuition, which is great. That's really important. But do your research, do your own research. Don't take somebody's word for it, and especially if it's a polarizing view. That's how I feel. So anyways, thank you so much for watching, guys. Once again, you can follow me on I pretty much Didonax, DIADONACS, on every social media platform. And if you want to hit me up anytime, I also have I'm putting together a Discord group. I think I'm going to transition SciTech's Discord group, because it's pretty inactive, to Conscious Energies Discord group. Try to get more people involved in the conversation, get more conversations going. If you have any suggestions or guests you would like me to reach out to, feel free to drop me a line and let me know about that. I will be out of town next weekend, so I'm not going to do a weekend podcast. But I'll probably try to get one more podcast in. I'll shoot for either Wednesday afternoon, or I'll try to hit it up maybe Thursday in the morning before I go out of town. And once again, I appreciate all you guys who support me, who watch the channel. It's little baby steps at a time. And I have a couple of people I'm reaching out to interview. We'll see if they have some time, if they can free up some time to get on here. I won't announce any names yet, but and now there's a new chat service. So people listening at home, if you want to participate, you can always come on to the YouTube live stream. I'll link that in the podcast. And once again, this is streaming on Spotify, iTunes, and whatever Apple service is. It's streaming on all three of those. So if you want to just listen and you don't want to put on YouTube or whatever to listen or watch, you can always stream on those platforms. So much love to you all. Hopefully my self-talk rambling of polarization wasn't too all over the place, sporadic. I've tried to keep it as ordered as possible, and all I can do is do better, and that's what I'll do. So much love to you all, and until next time, peace.